Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Sam and today's video is going to be a conversation between me and a good friend of mine, Davy, from Davy's Cinema Flicks and Music Picks YouTube channel. I'll leave a link for his channel in the description below. But yeah, as you probably tell from the thumbnail, we're going to be talking about one of my favourite things to talk about in film, which is David Lynch. And we're going to be talking about the new Lynch Oz documentary, which is about how intertwined The Wizard of Oz is into David Lynch's work. And I really hope you enjoyed the conversation.
Davy.
Sam.
So we're going to be talking today about a film by Alexandre O. Philippe. Lynch. Lynch Oz, which when it was announced, I was pretty pumped about this release. One, because Lynch is my boy. He's my favorite director of all time. There's no other filmmaker that's had an impact on my cinematic tastes than David Lynch. A lot of my favorite films of all time are David Lynch films, and if you're a Lynch film, you know that The Wizard of Oz is intertwined into every single thing he's ever done, basically. So I was very excited for this, but also maybe interested to see what new information could be brought to the table from this documentary. So do you have what are your initial thoughts on this thing?
First of all, thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
I remember talking to you when it wasn't even really announced, because Dogwoof aren't that big a company that people follow their announcements. It just kind of popped up in listings, word of mouth and whatnot. And I didn't even need to read about it or anything, just knowing that it's David Lynch, Wizard of Oz, Blu-ray, yoink. You know, it's one of those, just, even if it's bad, I don't care. It can't be bad enough for me to waste my money on it, because these two topics, Wizard of Oz and film history, and then David Lynch as my favourite director too, there's no way it could go that far wrong, surely. Although that Shining film certainly gave it a good go. What was that? Room 237? Is that what it was called?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So the worst that can happen is that's what it would be, where it was a film that was so in love with its own guile that it was off-putting. But I don't know, there was something about it. I just thought, no, it can't be as up itself as that. And boy, am I glad that I took a punt on it, because I loved this. I absolutely loved this. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to say that I loved some of it. Because for those of you not aware, it's not really a spoiler because it's a documentary, but the documentary is essentially a series of video essays.
Yeah.
Like, some of them are more academic in nature than others. And they're narrated, or they're told by, notable people. One of them is told by John Waters, which was my favorite chapter in the film. Also David Lowery does one. Amy Nicholson, who's like a film critic, quite a notable film critic in America. She has like podcasts and stuff, and I'm like quite familiar with her stuff. And then there are, forgive me for the names, I can't remember them all, but there are a couple of these where
Moorhead and Benson, who did the
end. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I did think that one was okay. But yeah, the John Waters one was just a delight to listen to, and it was really interesting to see the similarities between them in terms of like where they come from, their upbringing, what they're influenced by. Obviously, both of them are heavily influenced by The Wizard of Oz, and even though their films could not be any more different from each other, they very much have very similar sensibilities. And it was just, I'd never seen the picture of them before when they were both quite young. Must have been like the late 70s, outside like a fast food restaurant.
Big Boy, I think.
Yeah, something like that. And I was like, wow, that picture is fantastic. So I found some of this film quite illuminating, and other times slightly pretentious, because of one of the people starts to go on about how one of the greatest things I think has ever been on TV or a film, which is episode 8 of The Return. It starts to go on about how that episode was an omen for like a family member dying or something like that, and how it basically influenced his cat to like kill a bird and drag it into the house and stuff. And I was it lost me. I was like, I'm not sure what you're going for with this, but it didn't fit the tone of the rest of the film in terms of where they were just, you know, showcasing where the thread line is for, you know, Lynch and Oz, which is what the film's called, and how it all intertwines into film history and stuff. But I thoroughly enjoyed it, but if I was to watch this again, I would probably pick and choose the chapters, if that makes sense, because a couple of them I could have done without. And for a video essay film, how long is this? An hour and...
Well, that's the interesting thing too. It lies.
It does. It does.
It says it's 95 minutes, but it's actually an extra 15 minutes longer than that. It's about 20 minutes. It's just under 2 hours. Hey, happy accident there. I was more than happy to get more of this.
Did you listen to the audio commentary at all?
Yes, I did. I love Kim Newman. He's one of my favorite people, never mind commentators. But I've been following Kim Newman since the 90s, when he used to have a column in Empire magazine back when Empire was still decent. And it was reviewing straight-to-video movies. And he was always able to find the treasure amongst the absolute tosh. And he never looked down on genre film. So following him and his career, and then his writing career through all his books, Anno Dracula series and things, been terrific. And he's on so many commentaries that it's hard to keep up. So I was excited about this in particular. And to be honest, he's doing more of an interviewer thing. He's not really giving his opinion too much. He's doing more of the observation and then interviewing Mr. Philippe. And Kim Newman's, the quality of his audio was atrocious. It sounded as if somebody was holding a phone up to a microphone.
It wouldn't surprise me if that was the case. They probably thought, oh, we're releasing this film. We have no special features on it whatsoever. Kim, can you quickly do something on it? Like a couple of weeks before it went to press, probably. I've heard stories of special features that have been like that before. So
it's the worst quality audio on a commentary that I've ever heard, actually. Perfectly legible, but still you expect, when it's an audio commentary, that's all you're doing is listening. So it stands out much more than just some bad audio. Normally would. But his questions are reasonably insightful. The problem with it is the whole film is essentially what you're there for anyway, is the ideas and the themes and whatnot. So you don't really need much explanation of where Philippe is coming from. Although, interestingly, he doesn't do his own video essay. So it gives him a chance to explain more of his familiarity, background, and love of Lynch, which isn't, terribly unique. It's pretty much what you'd expect. But I will echo your sentiments when it comes to John Waters in particular. I think that he was able to be John Waters, but without being that version of John Waters that's kind of been in pop culture for the past 10, no longer than that now, maybe 20 years, where he's just constantly joking and everything's, he's like your lovable uncle.
Yeah.
Ever since he was in The Simpsons and things, I think he's been playing that up, and Alvin and the Chipmunks and whatnot.
Yeah.
But he's always been a massive Wizard of Oz fan, unabashedly. I mean, there's that famous quote from him, which I pulled up so I get it verbatim, by John Waters from one of his books. When they throw the water in the witch, she says, "Who would have thought a good little girl like you could destroy my beautiful wickedness?" That line inspired my life. I sometimes say it to myself before I go to sleep, like a prayer. And doesn't that just sum John Waters up perfectly?
It does.
I remember seeing a Q&A with him where he again referenced The Wizard of Oz, and he said it's the worst ending for a film ever because he can't imagine why a girl would want to leave a place where you have colour, gay lions, and your own kingdom. To go back to a black and white place with an auntie with bad dress sense, smelly pigs, and 3 men that just want to paw you all day. It's very John Waters to see that.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. Like some of the video essays touch on is like the darkness beneath the the shiny surface, like the colourful vibrancy that, you know, what is said in the documentary, like children take this at face value, but as you watch The Wizard of Oz as an adult, you can see the dark underpinnings. And also if you incorporate the Judy Garland's life into the mix, there's a really interesting theme of not being able to separate like art from the artist, and just the history of a person with something they've created, which is really, really interesting. That did make me think about it in a different way, because we won't go on about it here because we could talk hours on separating artists from from the art. But it did make me think about how you just can't separate Judy Garland's life from the making of The Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
And also all the I remember back in the day when the internet was first around, and people used to put like on conspiracy theories and stuff, and it shows it in this film of like the supposedly hanging munchkin or whatever it is in the background when they're going down the thing, and it's all a load of rubbish. At least I think so. But it's one of those myths that just perpetuates like through the years and stuff. So I found that sort of aspect of it. And even David Lowery, I think it's in his one, he talks about how he thinks the ending of The Wizard of Oz is just tragic, and it's just really sad that it goes back to being like sepia toned again. And it really, even though it on the surface, especially if you're a child or you just don't want to critically think about it, the ending of The Wizard of Oz is kind of a bummer. It's kind of a down note. So
I mean, I've always disliked the ending for the reason that it does diverge from the books, and not particularly because I think you shouldn't do that. I think it's perfectly fine. You're making a standalone film, but the film makes it reasonably explicit, although you can argue it that it was all just a dream, and she did have, she hit her head in the hurricane and the twister, and it was all in her head. I don't like that as a resolution. I think it's much more magical to leave it open-ended as the book does, and I think that's as you mentioned, there's a few people in this who have an opinion that you think that's a bit film schooly, rather than someone who just appreciates the films. So they're not able to put their academic side over here and just appreciate films over here. So they're very much kind of clashing. And I think the big part of that stuck out was one of them kept praising Victor Fleming's direction of The Wizard of Oz for the tone and things. He was the third director of it. So he was very, he was just parachuted in. He was very little to do with the tone of the film. There's no authorship for Victor Fleming. Just like Gone with the Wind, he was, I think, the fourth director of Gone with the Wind. I mean, it's not like he can take, which is also referenced in this documentary, Gone with the Wind.
Yeah.
There's no way he can take, which he didn't do, he was just a journeyman, take credit for it. So I think there is a danger of applying a bit too much authorship to works that were never intended that way. And we can see it in retrospect sometimes, but I don't know. I think that kind of they didn't mention the fact that he was the third director on the project, for example. They just kind of acted as he was the man behind making the film. And I also thought one of the I think it was the first section, which was called The Wind. It goes on quite a lot about, as a couple of them do, a young girl's journey into a magical world, and it almost acts as if The Wizard of Oz is the first thing to do that. And the whole time I'm just sitting there thinking, Lewis Carroll must be turning in his grave. I mean, did he write those Alice books for absolutely no reason whatsoever? The difference is, and I was hoping someone would make the point in the documentary and mention Alice, the difference is that, as with a lot of Lynch works, Alice follows the trail. She follows the White Rabbit, and she intentionally goes down the hole, follows it into Wonderland, which Lynch characters do. They Ken McLaughlin finds the ear, doesn't he, and starts to investigate himself. Whereas Dorothy, she isn't an instigator. She's swept up in a hurricane. So it's very different, those kind of jobs. So when they were talking about the hero's journey and things, I was like, no, I don't think you really understand the differences in their journeys here. I think you're trying to apply film school rationale to things that don't actually fit. Square pegs, round holes.
Definitely. Speaking of White Rabbits, it's been so long since I've seen the film, but like pairing The Wizard of Oz with The Matrix is kind of genius. I mean, it's kind of obvious now that I think about it, because he follows the White Rabbit with the I think it's the tattoo on the lady, isn't it? I think in the film.
Yeah.
But yeah, that whole segment in the film, I was just like, this sounds like a really good double feature, because they're so, even though their themes are quite similar, they're like, couldn't be any more stylistically different, obviously. But I love making connections. I love double features, like, or at least the idea of pairing something in my head thematically without them being too similar, but at least having a thread that can connect them. Because otherwise, if you're just watching two random films that have nothing to do with each other remotely, then that's not a great double feature. But yeah, really, really good.
When I've done double features in the past, and it tends to be things that will connect them, like a theme. Like I've done Catholic guilt as a theme, even though the films might be totally different. Or connecting it with maybe two cast members, and there's no connection thematically whatsoever. It's just purely on the cast list. But I find it very lazy when you see a double feature that say Alien and Predator. I think, oh God, how long did that take you to come up with? These very lazy ones, or I don't know, Invasion of the Body Snatchers and The Thing. Just
right, okay.
Oh, come on, that take 20 seconds to come up with. Just Google best remakes or something. That must take. But yeah, a lot of what I did love in here was when it makes connections, and I think it's David Lowery who makes the point best, that David Lynch's work and The Wizard of Oz, there's explicit references, as we know, especially in Wild at Heart. There's explicit references, but it's more a feel that's not one thing you can isolate, one scene you can say, definitely this. There's obvious things like the curtains and the idea of the man behind them, this film. But then David Lowery makes that point much better, that it is just a sense, it's a feel, it's just an Americana kind of vibe.
Yeah, it was repurposing an idea, basically. It's not just paying homage to the Wizard of Oz. It's more taking what the Wizard of Oz made like out there in the zeitgeist. He's just like channeling elements of it and repurposing it for his own, artistic expression, which is how influences should be done. Or I don't know if they should be done, but I think it's how they come across best, at least, where you sort of wear your influence on your sleeve, but also you're not just regurgitating the same thing over and over again because you love it so much and it's part of your DNA. That's great. Obviously, Lynch is like, I love, there's a quote where he says, "There's not a day that's gone by in my life I haven't thought about the Wizard of Oz." And I was like, that was quite powerful, to be honest, that this has had such an impact on his life for like, what, 67, I don't know, how old is the guy? He would have watched it on TV in the 50s in black and white, without the color elements. I'm always fascinated by that, because obviously the TVs were black and white, and then when they go, when they're in Oz and it goes into color, you don't see that on the TV back in the day. It's like, you just have to imagine it. If you maybe went to the theater to see it, you would have like gone, oh, this is the bit where it goes into color and stuff. And it's like, oh, they would have had that magical experience of like her stepping it through into all the color, and you're like, you wouldn't have had that and for a long time afterwards unless you actually saw it in a theater. So
yeah, when it was wonderfully done. I mean, it's so simply done as well that they literally just hired another actress who looked a bit like Judy Garland from the back, and the set was painted sepia. They gave her Judy Garland's clothes but painted sepia.
Yeah,
and then she literally just walks into a normal color set. So there was no trickery of camera or anything. They just painted a sepia set. That's genius.
So good.
It's not all an in-camera effect or something. It's brilliant. I loved, although I think it wanders a bit from the theme of the film, I loved when it was drawing comparisons on The Wizard of Oz to other works too, like Somewhere Over the Rainbow and Luke Skywalker looking out for the three suns.
Yep.
That was just, wow, of course it is. That's the exact same point of the journey that they're both on. Wishing they were somewhere else. There's got to be something out there. I'm not sure Luke Skywalker sang. I can't quite remember if he were quite good. But yeah, that scene was quite interesting to juxtapose, as was A Matter of Life and Death, or whatever the hell the American title of it was. They bastardized the title. I can't remember what it was.
I didn't.
Stairway
Did
to
they?
Heaven. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that. That's
It's been changed back in the home video era, but at the time it was released as like Stairway to Heaven or something like that.
okay.
And they do in that film, it's the reverse of the Wizard of Oz, where heaven is actually the black and white place.
Yeah.
And Earth is in color, and heaven's very bureaucratic, very Kafkaesque. And it's only when you get to Earth that you realize that's where it's at. So that was a nice kind of reversal, and that's done very cleverly in that film. But again, that's the kind of thing we think, oh, that person's clearly made an interesting connection between The Wizard of Oz and A Matter of Life and Death, and it's got absolutely nothing to do with David Lynch.
Yeah.
So it's like it's a fine topic for another video essay, to be honest. So I felt there was a little bit of padding from certain sections in that regard.
Definitely. I mean, the film probably should have been 95 minutes long, as it actually states on the back, and not 2 hours, possibly, because there were moments where some of these directors or personalities are talking about things that aren't even related to Lynch's work, and I'm like, this isn't Oz cinema in general. This is Lynch Oz. So I don't understand why you're talking about this, and the points that they make doesn't then circle back around to Lynch, in my opinion. So I feel like I'm being slightly too negative about this film, because I really did enjoy it. As a Lynch head, I absolutely eat anything up. Like, I've got books on Lynch. I've got like unofficial, like small writers that have just managed to publish something, or it's even like made on demand books by people who've just like felt passionate about to write about Lynch, and I've bought them just so I can just read what other people think about.
Oh, I see. You mean obscure writers? I thought you meant short.
Yeah, even just no, like just people who are maybe amateur writers. They don't have like a career or much experience in it, but they've been passionate enough to write something and like put it through the Amazon sort of self-publishing thing, where it's garbage quality, but at least you're getting the text and you can still read it and stuff like that. And it doesn't cost very much to buy those sort of books. But I've got loads of stuff like that, because I just want to take it all in, and just I could do a whole podcast series on the man and stuff, and talk about his daily sort of weather analysis videos.
And I'm really glad that actually comes up in this. There's a line that I think explains David Lynch very well. It's actually something that I recognize in myself and quite a lot of people that I know, where Lynch says he needs a small bit of exact structure every day in his life, and that allows him to do whatever the heck he wants for the rest of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Well, those weather reports were a little bit of structure every day for 3 years, and then he can do whatever he wants for the rest of the day. And I think that was quite interesting too, because that wasn't the same section, but he had that quote, and then later it talks about the weather reports that he did daily. So it's quite interesting that that's his structure. That he likes one little guaranteed thing every day, and then he can spitball from there. Nothing needs to be set in stone. It kind of explains a little bit.
Yeah, it's because how that man mind works. I'll never know. I know he's like really super into transcendental and meditation, so that will probably be part of his structure as well. I'm sure he meditates more than once a day, just sits there in complete silence and just channels his thoughts into nothingness, because that's apparently what you do in transcendental meditation. Is you just clear your mind of everything, is what I understand. Like, that's what you're aiming for, is just to sit there in silence and not have anything on your mind. I've tried things like that before, and I think my brain is way too busy to be able to do that for a sustained period of time. But if you're able to train yourself to do that, I can imagine that being very, very useful for a creative individual to sort of flush out all the noise and then allow new ideas to pop into your head after you've sort of palate cleansed your brain. I don't know. I may be talking utter rubbish here, but that's
No,
how
no,
I feel.
I think that's perfectly true, especially with such a creative brain, because Lynch has never been a drugs guy, not even a dope smoker or anything. He's obviously a nicotine addict, as big as they come. But I think, to be honest, he'd be far too busy chain smoking to ever do anything heavier than that. But the creative mind that he has, I think, is unburdened by those kind of side pleasures that other directors and writers and creatives have fallen into. And that might be because of TM, or sometimes not even because of it, but just because he thinks he's getting that kind of placebo effect from it. Who knows? I'm not a psychiatrist, but certainly it's you can see it in his work that it comes from a blank piece of paper, but from a mind that always comes back to themes and ideas, which actually I don't think the documentary gets into enough of that, the returning motifs of David Lynch. I think it just individually chooses where to contrast and compare with The Wizard of Oz, but it doesn't enough quite get into how he revisits certain themes that would, from Wizard of Oz. Like, it could have used every example of the curtains, for example, because that's all over Lynch's work. The curtains, for example. I mean, I love the opening of the whole film.
I did enjoy that.
It starts with the red curtains, and then it turns green like the Wizard of Oz, and it's so well done. It's almost like watching an episode of Twin Peaks, where it's got the electricity sound, and then cut flash, and the curtains are red. Cut flash, and it's green again. It's actually quite spooky and eerie.
Yeah, I did enjoy that. It's probably got nothing to do with like the Wizard of Oz per se, but I wish someone either in an essay or in a video essay or something would do a deep dive on the numerology of David Lynch's works. I don't know if you're familiar with the significance of numbers. So, and especially in like Twin Peaks and stuff, where it will just linger on an electricity pole and it will have the number 4 on it. And you're like, what's the significance of that? It's not there for no reason, but no explanation will ever be given to you. But David Lynch knows.
Or the scene where it tells Tammy Preston, the numbers on the fingers and whatnot in Twin Peaks season 3. It's got a lot of recurrent themes that, not just the documentary, I think, lingered a bit too much on casting as a theme, like Kevin McLaughlin using him as an avatar and using him sometimes as your Dorothy-like character. I thought, well, you can go a bit deeper than that, kind of stuff you've mentioned already. I think it should also have perhaps looked at areas where Lynch hasn't been influenced by The Wizard of Oz. I mean, there's no real Lynch film where the main character gets thrown into the adventure and then picks up friends along the way as a gang. That never happens, So it could have also gone into that kind of area of major themes of The Wizard of Oz that aren't in Lynch's work at all. And it didn't really do that. I would quite like to have seen. So obviously, some of it doesn't resonate with him even remotely. Because I don't know, it felt like it's a plus and minus for having the video essays. I wonder how many of these people had a much better 40-minute video essay that they could have done, but the format meant that they only had 20 minutes or so to do it. And likewise, some of them only had 8 minutes, but they somehow had to get it to 20 minutes.
That's how I feel about some of them.
And especially the one with Moorhead and Benson. And I like their films, and I was a little disappointed because I've always found their films to be quite magical. Quite, I wouldn't say massively Lynchian, but certainly they do like to leave things open-ended and unexplained. And they do like connections between films because The Endless is, I think there's 3 or 4 films that tie in to that now. And they didn't seem, between the pair of them, they had less to say than one John Waters, put it that way.
Yeah.
And it also didn't go into the personal connection with Lynch and Waters about how, mean, it never once mentioned, I don't know how this didn't happen, the phrase midnight movie. I mean, those were the first two main midnight movies, but sorry, there was El Topo, but then it was Pink Flamingos,
Pink Flamingos, yeah.
and Eraserhead. Those were the first three major.
Yeah, they're on the Mount Rushmore of midnight movies, basically.
It was the first big three, yeah, and then Rocky Horror was four. So the idea of having John Waters but not talking about that seemed a little bit strange. But I guess from John's point of view, he's written 3 books, he's done 1,000,000 one-man shows. You know, maybe he didn't want to repeat himself, but
yeah, I'm sure he talks about the same thing over and over and over and over again.
Like you said, the absence of special features, it feels like I could have gone another 10-15 minutes of John Waters. And, you know, even if it was audio only, because obviously they're not doing that in the editing and things and pulling all the clips. But I felt like, I bet there's more audio of all these people, and Philippe's cut them up into...
Definitely.
So I would love to have heard what's on the cutting floor for the audio for all these people. You know,
definitely.
Good or bad, but especially Waters.
So, Davy, tell me a little bit about that Wizard of Oz set that you've got behind you, because I'm not aware of this release. That looks fantastic.
Yeah, there was the 70th and the 75th, but this I got cheap because it's fallen to bits.
Oh dear.
Fallen to absolute bits at the side. Just needs a good bit of tape, to be honest, but I'm always reticent to tape things because, you know, tape goes in the end. You know, it goes that way. So better that, just look after it. But yeah, it's a nice pop-up. It's got the big book of memorabilia with all sorts in it. You know, the usual kind of thing we've seen. What's the number one bit of swag in here? There's a whole hardback book about the film itself. There's the film soundtrack. There is the digital copy, which remember they used to have to be on a separate disc back in the day. And then rather wonderfully, your own little camp Wizard of Oz 70th anniversary watch.
Nice, very good. Which
probably wouldn't wear out and about the streets of Glasgow. What's that? It's my Wizard of Oz watch.
That's a nice looking set. So you say that was the 70th anniversary?
70th, and then they did another one for the 70th, as usual. Same with Casablanca, same with Citizen Kane. Every 5 years, never mind every 25 now. They give a new big super deluxe box set.
Well, it has so many followers and like appreciators from around the world. They know they'll sell them. Because people they'll collect. It's a collectible thing. I've seen like videos on YouTube of people with their like Wizard of Oz collection, and it's just mad. Like it really is a cult film, even though it's like a huge Hollywood production. But it's still, a cult doesn't always mean like small and unknown, and it can also mean because Casablanca used to be like Casablanca used to be like a cult film because people used to like dress up in like their Sunday best and go to the theater and see it and stuff, and like have like meetings to discuss how much they loved it, sort of like internet forums before they existed, you know what I mean? So
I'm kind of gutted that I wasn't about for that. I'd love to go and dress like Claude Rains as Louis. That would be my ultimate. That'd be fantastic. I mean, while we're on the subject, so you know, go more Oz. Like, what's your history with Oz? Are you a particularly big fan of that film?
I wouldn't say I'm a massive fan. I definitely have a lot of memories of watching it as a child, like either on TV or on VHS, and it reminds me. I don't know why, because the films are nothing alike. But when I think of the Wizard of Oz, I also think of The Great Escape, because they used to be on at Christmas at the same time.
Yeah.
So when I think of that, I just, for some reason, I think of Steve McQueen when I think of The Wizard of Oz. It's a very weird thing, but I just can't separate them because like these early childhood memories can somehow like merge things together. Yeah. So I really like it. I've got it up there. I've got the 4K disc up there. It's still sealed. I haven't watched that 4K. I've had the Blu-ray, and I watched it maybe last time I watched it was probably, I don't know, 9 years ago, and I haven't seen it since I've actually become like a huge David Lynch fan. But the Wizard of Oz is very much in, like, it's in pop culture and it's referenced so all over the place. I feel like I know the film front to back anyway, and I have seen it multiple times in my childhood and stuff. But after watching this documentary, I'm definitely, at least in the next week or two, going to be watching that disc and definitely pulling from my own, obsessedness with David Lynch's work. Because, God knows I have deep dived on his filmography on multiple occasions just to get more of a more up-to-date and succinct knowledge of how it has influenced, just from a recent rewatch of the film in stunning 4K, because I've heard that 4K disc is absolutely spectacular.
One thing I loved them referencing was doppelgangers, or tulpas, if we're talking Twin Peaks. Frank Morgan obviously plays the Wizard of Oz, and he's Professor Marvel in the real world of Kansas in the Wizard of Oz. But for no reason at all, he also plays 3 different characters in the film. He plays the nobody sees the wizard and nobody not know how. And he plays that guy, and he also plays that's the horse of a different color. That guy. So he's got different little characters for no particular reason, which again is I think it's a bit of a stretch to say that Lynch took that from the Wizard of Oz, but I thought it was just an interesting observation that the film made, that they both did this, and the Wizard of Oz certainly had a big enough budget that they did not particularly need to reuse Frank Morgan in little bit roles. They just did it. They just had him playing different parts for no particular reason, because nobody else does. It's not as if Ray Bolger or anybody else plays multiple parts, apart from their real world counterpart, real world, be it Kansas or Oz, whichever you think the real one is. And as you said, it then goes into that wonderful notion of the real world, where it goes into the idea of, and it has to be said as well, if people don't know Lynch's work, make sure you do before you watch this, because it will spoil just about all of them. It does.
It's definitely made for people who are very familiar with his work. It covers pretty much all of his films. It even touches on like his short films that he made in like the early 70s and stuff like that. The grandmother and things like that. And so it does spoil some key points in the films. So if you're like thinking, oh, maybe I'll watch this documentary and see if I want to watch this director's work, expect to have that work spoiled for you before you watch it.
You mentioned it with the Judy Garland real life part, where you can read it as a kind of meta thing now, which obviously wasn't intended by the filmmakers or Judy Garland, because how did they know that her life was going to become an omnishambles? That wasn't the plan, and it wasn't until the last decade. I mean, she was still a major star. She with Star Is Born and Meet Me in St. Louis and great movies. But that real life meta aspect, combining and juxtaposing with the end of Twin Peaks: The Return, I thought was genius. The idea of, are they actually in literally our world now, where because the person that owns the house, the Palmer household, is the woman who actually owns it in real life. That was a fun observation, if not one that's definitely about anybody. That's one of those just kind of cool things to have pointed.
I completely agree with that. I'm glad you brought that up, because I did think about that during the film, thinking that is fantastic observation, because I didn't notice it, but then as soon as you say it, like, of course. And I did know that she was the owner of the house, because I listened to loads of podcasts and stuff when that summer of 2017 when The Return came out is one of my, in terms of like watching something consecutively, it's like the most invested in something I've ever been. I like subscribe to multiple podcasts on Twin Peaks: The Return. And I actually went traveling with my partner. We went to India for like 3 weeks, and it was during the middle of the show, And so I wasn't able to watch the show for 3 whole consecutive weeks, but I didn't get any spoilers or anything. But then when I came home, I had 3 whole episodes to watch, which was fantastic. And I was reading, like, on the travels, I was reading like Twin Peaks books and stuff. And that was such a fun thing. I was just scouring YouTube for anyone who was just doing like reviews or talking about the episode as it dropped and stuff, and that's basically all I did. I didn't watch any other films. I was just waiting, watching the episode, and then for the next consecutive week all I was doing was reading articles, watching YouTube videos, and people talking or listening to podcasts about that episode. I was so obsessed with it.
I had exactly the same experience, and my friends who, not enough of them, but friends who adore Lynch as much, in real life, if you will, being able to talk with them and just obsessing on lunch hour and work, just obsessing over it. And did you notice this? And did you notice that? And was that Balthazar Getty? He's back from, just all these strange little connections, and arguing over whether or not it matters that Coop's coming back, or are you just happy that it's Dougie Jones, or that kind of stuff. It was they call it event television, but I don't think the term has been used particularly well over the years. Twin Peaks was event television, just like it was back in 1990. It felt like, oh my God, cannot miss this. Need to watch it. Need to set the alarm and watch it the second it's up. That 2017 April was just stunning time. And the first 3 episodes dropped in the first night, if I remember right.
Yep.
And that just felt like, wow, this is like we're getting a whole Twin Peaks movie just to kick us off, and then a series to follow.
I can't believe that the show actually made it through a major, television network. Like Lynch was able to tell them, whoever, because there was a point where he was like, I'm not making the show, because they wanted to make it 12 episodes or 10 episodes.
They wanted to make it 12 episodes, and they wanted to, what was the other condition? It was something budget related.
Yeah, it was budget related.
Basically meant it was probably going to have to let people that had Dean Stanton and whatnot go, which would have been a travesty. Because they didn't want him to spend too much, because it wasn't a rating success. It did well initially, but it wasn't a massive smash hit. But that was always going to be the case. It was never going to be the new Game of Thrones or something. I don't know what they expected.
Especially because there was such an entry level to enjoying it in the first place. Like you couldn't start watching The Return without having watched the original series of Twin Peaks, at least the first series and a half, like half of series 2, because there's arguably you don't need to see half of the episodes in series 2. You don't need James
having an affair and stuff,
No, not relevant to the story, although there are a lot of fans of that narrative. That's each to their own. And then particularly Fire Walk with Me, which was absolutely panned, like audience-wise and critics-wise at the time when it was released. It's obviously had a huge reappraisal now. It's one of my favorite horror films ever made, because I do consider it a horror film. It has a Criterion release now, so it's got some plaudits who think it's worth people's time. But even though it's on Criterion, I'm like, if you watch this film without watching Twin Peaks, it's like it's such a level. So you have to have watched so much and know so much before going into it. Which puts off a lot of people, and why some people were like, well, I don't really want to watch 2 series of television before I watch this film, to then watch another brand new series of television that comes out, for the Return. It's such a weird thing. They're missing out.
To them, I just say, well, sorry, you're not a David Lynch fan, then you're clearly just wanting to keep up with what's cool, what's zeitgeisty, what's topping the Sight and Sound most wanted list and things. You need to be open to for that. For Twin Peaks The Return, you can even argue you needed to have watched not just Fire Walk with Me, but the missing pieces. You really
definitely.
What other show can you say you actually need to see the deleted scenes for it to make canon? So there was that, and then there's also, you get a lot more out of it if you watch Mulholland Drive, if you watch Lost Highway, certainly. In fact, there's that whole driving scene in episode 17, 18. That's pretty much the driving scene in Lost Highway.
Yeah.
And then I'd say quite a bit of Inland Empire as well. Obviously themes that he likes to explore over and over: identity, duality, the dark side of people can literally manifest as a different person. That does happen to the extent that Bill Pullman becomes a completely different person in Lost Highway. So Lynch explores those works, and it's almost like the way a playwright develops themes. They don't just do totally disparate things each time. They kind of a lot of great playwrights will, like Joe Osborne and whatnot would do the working class kitchen sink plays of the 50s and things.
Yeah.
And stick to that. I mean, it's a bit like that. So Lynch would develop these themes through film. And some people would say, oh, well, he's done that before. But it really felt like each time he was coming at it from a different angle or a more evolved position. And to accuse, somebody like Roger Ebert, if you remember, he hated Lynch's work for the longest time. So even for I don't think being a critic gives you any more relevance than anybody else, but somebody as revered by some as Roger Ebert, it took him decades to click with Lynch. I mean, he was accusing him of all sorts of misogyny and not for worse than that. I think
I still see that. I still see there are some detractors out there that still think Lynch is a misogynist.
Yeah,
and I just don't. But that's the thing. It's so the medium of film is so subjective. If that's how someone truly feels about a piece of work or that they watch, it's sometimes very hard to convince them otherwise. That's what they see in it. But it's very much not the case. I think David Lynch is. What am I trying to say? He's like depiction doesn't condone. What he's showing. He's just showing things the way it is, if that makes sense. It's not just because a film shows misogyny doesn't mean it is misogynistic.
Yeah, exactly. It's the difference between say John Wayne glorifying war and like the Green Berets. And then the anti-war movies like MASH and things, just a year or two later, or Kelly's Hero being irrelevant, irreverent, about it, not irrelevant. But it's the difference between, as you said, depicting it is not endorsing it. To show something is not to say that it should be done, even if it's a somewhat likable character. And sometimes these opinions seem to be people picking them up from the likes of Roger Ebert and then just rolling with it.
Yeah.
Because if he said it, it must be true.
Yeah.
And if the same film didn't change a lick of it, and then Roger Ebert ended up adding it to his list of great films or whatever he called it, which he panned. He didn't just give it a bad review. He called Blue Velvet one of the most disgusting films I'd ever seen. And Isabella Rossellini should phone the police. All sorts of nonsense. And I never saw that in Lynch's work one bit. To me, he shows some of the things that can happen to women, but that's because of some of the evil that men do, to say what Bob can be.
Exactly.
But the characters that have been played by Laura Dern, that have been played by Naomi Watts, I mean, they're stronger than most of his male leads.
Yeah.
So I don't see that as a criticism. I never did, even when it was kind of prevalent. Laura Palmer, I mean, Cheryl Lee, to me, that's one of the finest performances of the 90s. And I remember, just like you were saying, when that film used to be regarded as a failure in every sense, I always thought, what a wonderful performance. And you do still sometimes see people criticizing her for going too over the top. And you think, this is what she's supposed to be in the show, 17, 18?
Mm-hmm.
Well, she's a little bit old by the time the movie comes around to be quite convincing. But she's 17, 18. She's gone through nightly sexual abuse, and she's a coke fiend. But people don't want her to be over the top.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So you try that, folks, and see if you're subdued and quiet. I mean, what what a bizarre take. Cheryl Lee's performance in that film is remarkable, and it's one of my favourites in any Lynch film. To be honest, I think if her performance doesn't work, the whole film doesn't work.
100%. Yeah. Yeah, I think any more thoughts before we wrap it up, Davy? Anything? Are we going to get another David Lynch project one day, do you reckon?
Yeah, I mean, there was the stories that, what was it called? Wisteria or something was a project name that was bandied about. There was all sorts of rumours that he had a project on the go at Netflix. And I've never seen anything but the short with Jack the monkey.
Yeah.
We've never seen anything but that. It's one of those situations where I would be perfectly, in fact, I'd be over the moon, obviously, if we get more. But if we don't, I think we've got enough to be writing 1 billion books on and making all sorts of more documentaries. It's a bit like Tarkovsky's filmography. It's not the largest, but it's got enough to be getting on with for a million different theories and writers and imaginations that I don't think we need more. Do we want more? Of course we do. We're selfish that way. But when I see people, for example, saying she's wearing series 4 of Twin Peaks,
I don't need more Twin Peaks. No. Do not do that. Do not do that, please.
No. Yeah, exactly. That's the one project where I think he's made it clear, but at this point, he wants it to be left open-ended. Every time he's had the chance to end it, he has ended it openly. It's never come to a satisfying conclusion, be it Where's Annie, be it refusing to give it a tied-up ending in the film, or the what year is this when it comes to the return. So 3 times he's decided, I'm not going to give you the closure, because life doesn't give you closure, so why should Return of Twin Peaks? So yeah, I'm happy with what we've got, all the ancillary things, and as this proves, there's a million different things that can be pulled from his work and examined, and painstaking detail, sometimes far too over the top, sometimes irreverently, sometimes far too seriously, but sometimes absolutely fascinatingly as well, and gives you a fresh insight as a viewer, which is a real gift when you can watch a film with fresh eyes that you've seen 100 times. Like I'm sure you will with The Wizard of Oz when you, as you say, watch it in the next few weeks.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, Davy, talking about Lynch Oz, directed by Alexandre O. Philippe, sorry, director, if I've mispronounced your name.
Maybe he's Irish, O Philippe.
I don't think he is Irish.
O Philippe. It's O apostrophe Philippe.
Yeah. But yeah, this has been an absolute pleasure. I hope all the viewers out there have enjoyed talking about Lynch a little bit, because I know that I can talk about Lynch on a daily basis. And we'll definitely have to do something like this again, Davy, on your channel and also back on my channel. So signing off. Thanks to everyone for watching, and take care.
Thank you.